This is for my son. So Malachi wanted to see everything that's going on, so I told him I'd wear my Snapchat spectacles just to get video. So this is going to happen a couple times. So hey, I'm Matt. Oh no, he pressed. I did a lot of work on this thing, so I wanted to make sure y'all just kind of took in its glory for a little bit. Yeah. Well, I paid somebody and then I fixed because I'm obsessive like that. So, all right. So one thing we are going to do before we start, and this is also related to my son, is that I am sure that you did go to sleep at 9:30 and get a great sleep. But one of the things I found is that especially first thing in the morning, we're all dragging a little bit. Maybe went out a little bit later than 9:30. So I asked my son to do one little thing for us. Oops. Let's do that.
At the beginning of the conference, I want everybody to do a little exercise to get them excited and to get them off their feet, to get them some energy. What I thought was, what if you told them what to do? All right, so show them one little exercise they should do. All right, that's it. You remember what that's called?
Jumping jacks.
How many times I got to do it? 2 or 5 or 10? What do you think?
I think we should do it 20 times.
20 times. All right. Say see you later.
See you later.
All right, so I'm mic'd up, so I can't do it, and half of you don't actually want to stand up. For those of you who would with me, maybe let's do like a stand up and do like a modified, maybe like 5 jumping jacks. So maybe just like kind of this. So seriously, be willing. This is for my son, so come on. Like he's cute, he's adorable. So ready? 1, 2, 3. Some of you are doing actual jumping jacks. I'm so happy right now. I love you all so much. This is for you, Malachi. All right. One last thing while you're standing. Okay. Can we say hi, Malachi? 1, 2, 3. Hi, Malachi. Okay, you guys just made my day. Thank you. All right. That's it. We're good. I promise I'm actually going to teach you things, but this made everything worth it. So, all right. So, see if the remote works.
At the beginning of the conference.
Okay. That was one thing. Okay, so a brief history of the talks that I've given. You may or may not have seen any of my talks before, but every single one has been in response to something that is going on in our community. So the first talk that I gave in the PHP world was called Why Modern PHP is Amazing and How You Can Use It Today. And it was at PeersCon 2014, which is primarily Expression Engine and Craft CMS and CodeIgniter folks, not a lot of Laravel people, that space. So I had joined the Laravel community, I'd learned all this modern PHP stuff, and I said, whoa, look at all these amazing things, I want to bring them elsewhere, okay? That doesn't matter that much, but I want you to see this kind of trend. Then I did Sharing Laravel, which was kind of the same thing. I was like, hey, there's all these great things we can learn from Laravel. We don't all do just Laravel, so look at all these great things. We can use Composer, we can use these modern development practices. And then a little bit later, I said, oh man, rapid application development. We all have these ideas. We're not all that good at actually bringing them to reality. Laravel will make this great for us, so I made a talk that was that. And then later, I was like, wow, sometimes we're good at coding and not good at being decent human beings, so let's learn some empathy. And so each of these times, it was in response to something that's happened. So then, I wrote a book, we had a baby, disappeared off the face of the planet for a while, returned back this spring, and I recognized that the most appreciated, the most commonly commented on aspects of my book that people felt like they didn't know beforehand and they learned was the container. The container is foundational. Not understanding how the container works in Laravel has a huge impact on your ability to do a good job. So I said, okay, great, mastering the Illuminate container. So finally, on to Custom Laravel. So that asks us the question of wherefore Custom Laravel, which really means why, but that doesn't look as good in a slide, so I put wherefore instead. Plus we're in New York, so Shakespeare, all that kind of stuff. So what I'm talking about here is people often ask questions in LaraChat Slack or Stack Overflow or whatever else, or I often see people writing code that would best be solved by stuff that's already in Laravel, but they don't know it. So they send an issue in saying, oh, we should add this feature that's not currently there. Or they write some code that's very hard to understand and probably not quite as well written as the stuff that's been already vetted by the Laravel community. Or whatever else. When if they just understood that Laravel can already do these things, but you just need to learn a little bit more, you wouldn't have to do it yourself. So the idea of Custom Laravel, the idea what we're going on here is, first of all, understanding how to make those decisions about when we do something ourselves and when we don't. And then also understanding, hey, what are some of the things that I've noticed that people at various levels, I'm customizing, or I'm calling them kind of 101, 201, 301. What are some things that I notice people frequently not knowing is there, and then reproducing on their own instead of just using the tools that are already there? First half of the talk is a little more ideological. Second half of the talk is going to be real quick, a whole bunch of things. But I'm putting all the notes on a website afterwards. Literally every bullet point from every slide with links to external sources will be on customlaravel.com at the end of this talk. So don't worry about frantic notes because it's going to be fast, and there will be a much broader resource available for you later. If you don't know me, you can't tell already, I talk fast. Don't worry about scrambling. Just kind of absorb it and then go look it up later. So first part of this is this ideological aspect of it, the soul of customization. What am I actually talking about when I'm talking about customizing Laravel? So in Laravel, we got the best defaults. You know, it's the best. We're just, when you show up, it's just kind of you should work with them. And this is actually a thing that people need to realize when they start working with Laravel, is that it's actually an extremely well-reasoned set of basic defaults that it comes with, that as long as you can be happy with those, just be happy with them. And I've already spoken that on previous talks, so I'm not going to bother with it too much this time. Like Rails, we call this convention over configuration, which is out of the box, it just works, deal with our conventions, you don't have to reset it up every single time, right? And that's really great. However, a lot of Laravel's detractors and a lot of the people who I talked about before who are kind of confused about how best to customize their applications don't quite understand it because they think that means convention instead of configuration. There's a great convention, but if I don't like the way it works, I got to throw it out and completely start from scratch. And this is where you get a lot of like the no framework people who are like, oh, well, I can't do that because I don't like this one thing. Well, it turns out it's not really that. It's really convention and, when helpful, configuration. Turns out you can do both with Laravel, and it's really, really, really easy to do so. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Here's a few of the basic ways you can do that. I'm going to talk about a lot more, but just so that when I'm spending this whole time talking ideology, and I haven't actually told you what are the practical aspects we're going to talk about, here's just like a teaser. For example, did you know that everything in the app directory of every single new Laravel app is there because it's supposed to be customized? Literally every line of code in the app directory is intended for you to change it, because if it wasn't, it would be in the vendor directory. And we all know that for the routes file, right? OK, that makes sense. We know that for the controllers. OK, makes sense. Although when you have the auth controllers, you kind of don't touch them because you're kind of scared of them. The default middleware, the default providers, they're there for you to change them. And if it wasn't intended for you to change most of the lines in them, it wouldn't be in the app directory. We also have an extremely flexible container. Like I talked about before, the container is the soul of Laravel. It's the power behind Laravel. And not understanding how to use it extremely well is going to limit your ability to know how to make these kind of customizations. And with that container, we get macros, facades, rebinding, and a whole ton more that we'll talk about. We got environment variables, conditional config, all this kind of stuff. And it's also just PHP. In the end, these are just PHP classes that you can modify the way you want. You can use inheritance. You can use interfaces. You can extend things, whatever else you want. But again, before we get to the practical things, what you can customize, what you do customize matters. Jeffrey Way, you may have heard of him, kind of man around town in the Laravel world. He often talks about the fact that when we first learn a new coding practice or a new technology or something like that, the first thing we do is go ham on it. Use it in every single thing. Repositories everywhere, command buses everywhere, whatever else, because we're excited about it. It's a natural thing. I'm a bass guitarist, and when bassists first start, they play really simple things. And then when they get a little ability, they're like all over the place, all over the time. And then when they get a little bit better, they go back to playing simple things again, because they're like, wow, I really overdid that when I first learned it. We as coders do the exact same thing. We learn the thing, we go crazy, and then we pull back a little bit and know when to use it and when not to use it. So taking it too far is a rite of passage, over-customizing, over whatever, that's fine. But having a good understanding of what the right way and the wrong way to do these things will help us write better code, but also write code that's better for people in the future, whether that's us in the future or another developer. So 20% Time is a fantastic podcast run by Caleb Porzio and Daniel Coburn of Titan. And there's a little kind of saga that you can watch happen throughout the history of the podcast, where at the beginning, Caleb discovers macros, which I'll talk about in a second, which is very, very, very custom. It's a thing that you can do that is out of the box, but it's almost like so customizable that it's like not even Laravel code. So you can write a macro, and somebody could have no idea where that macro came from. And Caleb falls in love with them. I want to use them for everything. And then a couple episodes later, Caleb's like, I hate macros. They're terrible. Because when you come into a macro and you haven't seen it for 3 months, you don't know what's going on. And that's exactly the thing I'm talking about here. It's this discovery of, like, there's a tool that's fantastic when you use it all over the place. And I ran this by Caleb before, and he totally gets it. And you should check it out again in the talk notes. Like, I don't want to say show notes. In the talk notes, I'll link to each of the episodes and all these other things. And so it's that kind of same experience of, like, wow, I can use this everywhere. Oh my gosh, there's some reasons not to. And so we're going to talk through some of those. So I spent a lot of my time reading other people's code. So I'm a CTO or whatever you want to call me, so I do code reviews. We inherit other code bases, and I have to make sure that we're all set up ready to take them over. We also do code audits. I also do a lot of open source stuff. I read other people's code a lot. And there's a huge difference for me in how much I enjoy and understand somebody's code base based on how easy it is for me to discover what's actually going on here. Why is this happening? Where is this defined? What's actually going on here? I call this discoverability. Caleb in the podcast called it apparentness. But the goal here is to understand how every single line of code you write might be either easier or harder for somebody else in the future to grok on their first approach. So how easy is it to discover each of these custom things that you've done, and how easy is it to find where it's defined? So one baseline maxim, this is not a rule, no rules here because everything needs to be flexible, but one baseline maxim is write your apps so that anyone who's read the Laravel docs can jump into them easily. If you read my book, if you read the docs, if you've got all the stuff that's there for base flatline Laravel, you should be able to jump in and understand 98% of any Laravel app. And if you don't, it's either an incredibly complex domain, which hopefully you can get code that makes it easier to understand, or somebody kind of went a little too custom. And so that's kind of the goal we want to reach for. And like I said, I did write a book, so laravelrunning.com, buy. I actually have some copies I can give away. I don't know how to give them away, so come ask me for a copy, and I might just give you one if I'm feeling friendly. So anyway, I understand Laravel well, wrote a book, know the things, and I still have a lot of trouble entering some people's code bases. I literally put this up here just to see if I can start some drama like Jeffrey did with his visual debt thing. So I don't actually call it this, but now I'm gonna, you can like take a picture and be like, oh my God, Matt Stauffer said customization debt. No, I don't know, okay. All right, so as I imagine everything, I imagine there's like a scale of discoverability. It's not as if something is or is not discoverable, but it is how discoverable is it. And you imagine somebody who, again, has that baseline knowledge of Laravel, who comes to your code base 6 months after the project was started, whether it's you or somebody else, how able are they to figure it out? And so procedural code, like line by line of PHP, which I think all of us have written at some point in our lives, that's the most discoverable. Like in procedural code, it says the thing, it does the thing, that's the end. And then the opposite end is some kind of like black magic where you have no idea where the impact of that thing changing happened because all you've done is a read, and somehow you did a read there, and it deleted the whole database there. And it's like, I have no idea what's going on here. So that's not discoverable code. So some caveats on discoverability. Just because something's less discoverable doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. Sometimes the best tool is not the most discoverable tool, and sometimes it's us that needs to change, not the tool. There's someone who works at Titan, Jameson, who I love for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I love it is because he spends a little bit less time totally obsessed with the whole Laravel world than the rest of us. He does great code, and he's been doing great code for a long time, and so often he's like, yeah, you guys can show me stuff if you're excited about it. And so he's like a corrective. When we're all super excited about something and kind of taking it too far like Jeffrey does, he's like, why are you doing that again? And we're like, well, because I saw it in a Jeffrey video, because I saw Adam did it, because we're all excited about it, whatever. And so, but sometimes it's actually really good. So I remember when collections came along, he's like, why are you doing that again? And we're like, because they're awesome and you will learn them. But at first, and he loves collections, but at first, using collections seemed undiscoverable, right? For somebody who doesn't know them, they don't seem particularly discoverable, and sometimes it's worth it. So there's a balance here for sure. A few kind of common discoverability disasters. The best discoverability disasters that I have in my brain are NDA, so I can't tell you. So I'm sorry, but maybe you can kind of like extend these a little bit. Overriding default methods in Eloquent, like create. Things that people aren't expecting you to do. They think they know how it works, and then you change it. Or modifying the request object. A request always represents the user's intentions, and what the user sent you always, unless somebody modifies it in middleware and you didn't know that happened. Or the entire concept of route controller, which thank God is not around anymore, where it just magically maps a whole bunch of routes over to a controller without them ever actually being explicitly defined. Custom facades that it turns out aren't actually facades because the people who wrote them didn't realize what a facade was, and so they just put a whole bunch of static methods everywhere. Or anything that makes you go, ooh, that's clever. You shouldn't want to go, that's clever. You want, oh, that's really simple. Or, oh, that's obvious. I should have done that. But ooh, that's really clever. That's a good sign that that might not be something that you're going to understand 6 months down the road. And this right here is actual code that was actually delivered to us by an actual contractor. And this UML diagram with interfaces and entities and gateways and abstracts and repositories and tags, whatever, this literally does this. I'm not joking. This actually happened. And this was an example of taking it too far. This was DDD abstraction, blah, 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 taking to the point where literally you needed this to do that. So what we're talking about here is how to customize Laravel and how to do it responsibly. That's the soul. Now let's look on to the customization tips and tricks. But before we get there, I need to say, with great power comes with great responsibility. Remember, the tips and tricks I'm going to teach you are not necessarily all the most discoverable. So I'm not saying hey, you should make stuff discoverable. Now I'm going to teach you the discoverable things. No, you should make things discoverable. Great responsibility. And now I'm going to give you, not necessarily great power, but I'm going to teach you a whole bunch of things that are varying levels of discoverable. And also discoverability depends on the code base and the people who are working on it and everything. So some of these are going to feel more or less discoverable. You make the choice. I'm not giving you hard rules. I can't tell you which of these to use and which of these not to use. I can teach you some general ways to think about it, and then you're going to make the choice every time. And in every code base you work in, that answer is going to be different. So we're all grown-ups here, and so I want to treat you like grown-ups. One last stop before the tips. You must understand the container. And I understand that I already gave a talk about it, but you weren't all at Laracon Online. So I am going to give you the 5-minute introduction to the container. So the container is a Laravel application. It's the Laravel container. You've seen it referenced by many different names. And there's primary things that we're doing with the container. We're registering things into it. We're resolving things out of it. Laravel is resolving things out of it automatically. We're allowing for auto-wiring and also explicit binding. We're using service providers to do this, and we also have aliases and facades. I'm going to go over them fast. If this is all new to you, go check out my slide deck for the Mastering the Illuminate container talk, which also will be linked in the talk notes. Registering things in the container. It's a key value store. You say, put this thing at that address. That's it. So an address is like a string, like it's a fully qualified class name, or it's a shortcut string like log or something like that. And a thing is something that represents an instance. That might be a class name, or it might be a closure that teaches you how to resolve the instance, or it might be an actual object. Whatever it is, it's a thing and an address. That's registering things in. And resolving things out is saying, hey, give me the thing at that address. So you say, give me the thing for address logger, and it gives you back an instance of the logger class. You can also resolve, not just by explicitly asking for things out of a container, but also by type hinting anything that is resolved by the container, which we'll talk about now. Anything that Laravel creates, any class, especially the native classes like controllers and middleware and everything like that, will be created using the container. Laravel never says new thing. Laravel says container, give me thing, which means you have the ability in your constructors for all your things to type hint whatever you want, and that's an instruction to the container, give me one of those using all of your wisdom and knowledge. And this is why we can type hint dependencies in controllers and middleware, but also some methods. For example, calling handle or fire on a job is also resolved using the controller, which means you can type hint dependencies there as well. All right, auto-wiring versus explicit binding. Auto-wiring means the container is smart, and if you ask for an instance of app/thing, the first thing it'll do is say, OK, new app/thing. And if that works, it gives it back to you, and you're done. The next thing it's going to do is it's going to say, wait a minute, are there dependencies in the constructor for app/thing? If so, it uses reflection. It sniffs out what those are. And then it does the same thing for each of those. OK, new dependency. Can I do that? Cool, pass it in app/thing. If not, it goes down and down and down and down and down until eventually it gets to the point where it's able to resolve all the dependencies and pass them all back up the chain and give you an app/thing, or until it hits one that it doesn't know how to resolve, in which case it's be like, I don't know how to do this, sorry. When you hit that point, then, and only then, do you need to explicitly teach how to bind something. So we rely on auto-wiring for almost everything, because as long as the container can figure it out on its own, it's good. But we may hit a point where, for example, in order to construct something, you need to pass in an API key. The container doesn't know how to pull an API key out of Twilio for you. You need to pass it in somewhere. And so at that point, you set up a service provider. You have a binding that says, hey, container, when you want an instance of thing class, you're going to need to new it up like this. Return new app thing, my API code. It's the only thing we need to do explicitly is teach it how to handle things that need the special instructions. Everything else it's going to resolve for us. You can also do aliases. This is something that I think that even a lot of really advanced people don't know. They know that there's like a logger somewhere, but they don't actually know how it works necessarily. Laravel basically, on boot, has these little short strings, things like logger, and it teaches Laravel how to instantiate that, and then it aliases a whole bunch of classes and interfaces to that short string. So for example, logger, there's probably 2, 3, 4 interfaces that are, so the Illuminate login contract is alias to logger. The PSR interface for logging is alias to logger. And what that means is anytime anybody asks for any of those, it's going to say, give me something of logger. And then somewhere else, it says, hey, when somebody asks for logger, give me this. So we tend to think of it as something like, well, Laravel binds it to some individual class, and then maybe there's a short name for convenience. But actually, everywhere, Laravel binds your primary things that you're working with to a short string, and then aliases all of the dependencies that need that thing to that short string, which means you have a lot of power to just change what that short string is resolving to, and all of a sudden you've changed your whole app everywhere. Facades are similar. They say, I'm going to make a new class called a facade. And any time anybody calls a static method on this facade, proxy that call through to an instance of some other thing. And usually a facade basically has like a reference to one of those short strings, and we'll talk a little bit more about them later. All right, so Matt's Illuminate Container School. You right there, you have a diploma. You're ready to go. If you don't feel confident, go check out the slide deck for Mastering Illuminate Container later. But this is enough for you to kind of walk through the rest of the thing for us. So now, back to the show. Custom Laravel 101. This is the basics. Like I said, I watch LaraChat Slack, I watch GitHub issues, I watch Stack Overflow, I watch these things, and I see the things that people most often have trouble with. And so even if you probably know a lot of these things, you folks who are willing to fly the whole way here, I don't think all of you do. And so what I want to do is cover some base stuff. Also, this is for you out there in the wherever the camera is audience, to make sure that we all have these things baseline. So I'm going to go fast. Don't worry. Look at the website afterwards, customlaravel.com. All right, number one, did you know that you can make custom config file keys? We have all the basic ones we're all used to, right? And you have the config files that come out of the box, and you reference those. You can also just add new keys. So often, if I'm connecting to a new service, like a MailChimp or something, I go to this config/services.php, I add a new little block for MailChimp, and I add all the keys I need there, and I pull them there. You can just add them there. It's great. But you can also make custom config files. Let's say you need a whole chunk of things about chat. We'll just add a new file, config/chat.php. Whatever you return in there is just going to get keyed using periods between each array indentation level. You can also make your own .env variables. Turns out you're not stuck with just the ones that come out of the box. Create your own and then pull them into the config. You're good to go. It's perfectly fine. There's no limitation that you can only use the things. And you can actually delete .env key value pairs that come out of env example out of the box. It's like totally acceptable. Like nobody's going to come hunt you down for doing that. One really important thing, don't ever reference env like helper in your code. It will slow it down. The .env library is actually somewhat slow. Laravel takes care of it for you because when it pulls it in your configs are then cached. You use PHP artisan config cache, you're good to go. But that doesn't help you if you're using your env variables in your controller or in your views. So don't ever do that. Anytime you have an environment variable, pull it into a config, and then reference that config the rest of your app, and then you can use config cache. Also, the default controllers, like I said, they're a little bit magical to us, right? They work until we want to change them, and then we throw them away and start from scratch. Turns out there's an incredible amount of customization they make available to you. For example, there's hooks all over the place. Now, first of all, remember, anything that's in the app directory is meant to be edited. And there's quite a few that actually come in the app directory. Like there's a couple methods that are obviously, they're making it clear to you, hey, you should be changing these. But if you look at those login controllers, reset password controls, all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of hooks in the thing that they extend, the authenticates and registers users trait or whatever else, where they are basically pointing to a hook that has a default, but they're expecting you in your login controller, in your reset password controller, whatever else, to make your own authenticated method, to make your own validate email method, to make your own auth.passwords.email view, or whatever else. There's all these things where they could have just pointed to a string in the basic login controller. Instead, they pointed to a property named redirect2. Why? So that you can extend it in yours, and all of a sudden, you're still using the base thing, but you're redirecting somewhere else. All over the place, when you're using these default things, go look. First of all, go look what's in app/php, or app/everything.php, but also go look at what it extends. And there's these hooks all over the place. So I've mentioned a few of them for the default auth controllers. There's also a few methods that don't do anything at all in the basic login controllers or whatever else. Authenticated doesn't do anything. It's just got two little slashes because it's there to tell you, hey, if you want to do something every time a user authenticates, why don't you have your own authenticated method and do it in there? Those are the little hints, but you got to go looking for them. All right. We also have the default providers. App service provider does nothing. It just has two little slashes, because it's for you. It's for you to get started. It's for the place for you to start changing your bindings, your registrations, all that kind of stuff. This is what it's for. And eventually, if you find you have 20 bindings related to Twilio, well, then go make a Twilio service provider. But don't worry about it right now. If you're getting started, go throw it in the app service provider. You've also got the auth service provider and the event service provider. How do I know that you should be modifying these things? Well, first of all, they're in the app directory. And second of all, they got those two little slashes down there that are telling you, you should do something here if you feel like it. So if you want to do some binding things that have to do with the authentication, do it in the auth service provider. Something about events, do it in the event service provider. It's there for you. Same thing's true for the route service provider. If you take a look at that map method right there, map API routes, map web routes, // It's almost suggesting that you should do your own route mapping groups. Maybe you have a dashboard that's different than everything else. Maybe you should do a map dashboard routes method. It's up to you. This is all under your control. A pro tip, which you probably have picked up from what I'm saying here already, anytime the stock files have / that's a sign that you should consider customizing them. They don't just sprinkle them for fun. That is telling you, hey, you might want to do something here. And so look for those, keep your eyes open for them, and it's a hint to you that you might want to customize this. We also have default middleware that come out of the box. Verify CSRF tokens, trim strings, encrypt cookies. Each of those three has an accept array, which is literally there for you to very easily customize their basic functionality. Trim all strings, accept. Encrypt all cookies, accept. Verify routes for CSRF tokens, accept. That's literally for you to customize. Same thing is true for the redirect if authenticated. If you want the middleware that redirects you if you're authenticated to always take you to the, hey, welcome back page, well then just set that and then you're done. We also have custom middleware groups. We've got the API and the web middleware group, which are instantly wrapped around routes/api.php and routes/web.php, so we don't often think about them. But you can create your own. Go to app HTTP kernel middleware groups, and you can add a new one named admin. And you can have a grouping of middleware classes or middleware shortcuts or other middleware groups, whatever you want. It's your power. You can do this. This is meant for you to edit. Or you can make your own custom middleware. Anytime you find yourself commonly writing the same kind of guard methods or the same intro methods in your controllers, go make a new middleware. Our PHP artisan make middleware, keep out bad people. I like that one a lot. And you can apply it globally to the whole site. You can apply it just to a middleware group, or you can make it route optional. So it's one of those ones where you can kind of pass it in your route definitions. And it looks like this. High-level intro with the middleware, you're basically past the incoming request, and then you're past next, which represents like the rest of the stack. So like request comes in, it hits you, and then it goes the rest of the way. Essentially, it's a little more complex than that. And you get to do whatever you want with it until you pass it off. Or you can be like, you know what? It's a bad person. I'm going to abort right here, and we're done. Like you have a lot of freedom available to you. You can also do custom exceptions. You can make a new exception called trying to hack us what the heck exception, has its own custom message decorator. Maybe it's got some custom testing methods or something like that. And then you can also have custom exception handling rules. In 5.5, or prior to 5.5, you go to the exception handler and you say, if exception is type blah, 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 then do this. If it's type blah, do this. In 5.5 and later, on the exception itself, you do a report method and a render method, and it's customized right in the space. Again, 5.5, adding these new features is a hint that, oh, well, if those things are there, maybe I should consider custom exceptions as a thing I'm going to use more often. Additionally, all over the code base, you'll notice that chunks that previously would have been in a method. For example, the route service provider map API routes, remember that? It's really just a routes file that could have been directly inline in that class, but that would have been awkward. So we included it out to a route/API file, right? Turns out you can do that other places. What about schedule? If you look at the default scheduler, it has this whole schedule command inspire hourly thing. Well, what if you had like 500 schedule items in that class, in that method? It would feel kind of gross, right? Well, turns out, go make a schedule.php file, throw those files in there. This is just PHP. You can do that. And I think we don't always feel the freedom to do that kind of stuff, but we can. On the front end, more customization. PHP artisan make off generates all these files, all these things for you. Turns out you can edit those. They're not stuck where they are. You can do whatever you want. Or with 5.5, the front-end presets. You may find that you always do things a certain way. You might want to pull request a new front-end preset. The React front-end preset basically came because Samantha Geitz, every single time she spun up a new Laravel app, she was like, delete, 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 view, gosh darn view, delete, 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 and then spun up some other stuff. And we're like, hey, maybe this should be a thing. So that's kind of where it came from. All right, GIF break. Oh, no. GIF break fail. There we go. Just going to let you stop and enjoy that just for a second. Just awkward pause. That's all this is going to be. This is like it's not spirit animal. I don't want to use that term. I know it's not, it's a little loaded. But like every time I need a little like boost in my day, Hot Girl comes out and she's just kind of she really does it for me. So, all right, Custom Laravel 201. All right, one thing you might be interested in doing is adding assertions to the base class. For example, assert user is admin. If you're running assertions over and over again that kind of have a name, that kind of have like a shape to them, well, you might want to consider making that shape be something that actually has a convenient name for it, like assert user is admin. So just extend the PHP unit base case or the test case, and then you're good to go. You can use it in all your tests. Or in your setup for your tests. You might be interested in rebinding or mocking some classes, so all of a sudden your logger is always different in all your tests or in just one test. You can do that. It's available for you. We'll talk a little bit more about how to do that in a second. Or you can migrate your seed and setup. You probably tried that one before. You might want to add custom variables to PHP unit.xml so that you have certain environment variables that are available to you in testing that you don't want to put in .env. Or you might want an env-specific testing thing. You can do that as well. .env testing, and you pass a certain flag to PHP unit, and you're good to go. Or there's the beautiful refresh database migration trait that is coming available to us in 5.5, which solves a lot of our problems. But prior to 5.5, it's the migrate versus transactions, migrations versus transactions. All these things are customizations that you can do without having to write your own code. It's just understanding the options that are available to you and working your particular way. Or maybe you want some helpers. Bring back helpers.php. All you got to do is create a helpers.php file, go to your composer.json, and auto-load the files like that. And now you're going and creating your own file. And notice, and again, if you listen to 20% Time podcasts, you know this. People are always pull requesting helpers, which is great. But if it gets turned down, just go add it to your own apps. You might even want to come up with a skeleton group of helpers or a group of something else that you install as your own package on all your apps, and you try to get your friends to like it. And maybe it has 10,000 installs, and then you can use that to persuade Taylor to actually bring it back in the core like you wanted today. Who knows? But regardless of whether it's in the core, you can do it. You have all this power available to you. All right, container rebinding. So this is what I said we're going to talk about in a second. Remember how I said everything is bound to those little short strings, right? So let's walk through the step of what it would look like for us to do a binding of a new class real quick and what it would look like. So first of all, you bind your class. You say app bind my class, so that's the string, that's the address, and then a closure. And that closure will be instructions. A closure is like an anonymous function. It's instructions for every single time the container asks for an instance of my class, give them the response from this closure. OK, cool, basic stuff. The next thing is, well, what if I also want an interface to be alias? That actually should be an alias, not a binding. But basically, you say, every time somebody asks for my interface, give them this thing. Or every single time somebody asks for my interface, give them this closure, whatever. You have this ability, even if something's not concrete, to be able to do that. But then you get your superpowers when you bind your class to a global shortcut, like Laravel does. And so instead of binding to the class name, you bind to the shortcut, and then you can alias multiple things in there. And so like you can see, I bound something to my alias, and now I'm having multiple aliases that are all pointing to that little my alias shortcut. Or similarly, if you want to replace the logger, all you do is find something that implements the same interfaces, and then just say app alias logger, or app, yeah, the other way around. You basically bind your instance into the logger, and all the things that are alias to this logger string now automatically pointing over to yours. And here's an example. When 5.0 first came out, someone was very frustrated, and rightfully so, that all of a sudden they couldn't change their storage path. All of their Laravel 4 apps and later were able to change storage paths, and they couldn't change the storage path, and all of a sudden their app couldn't be upgraded because they couldn't change the storage path. So the answer was extend the container and overwrite the method that defines the storage path. That's it. You just have a single, my container or whatever, and all it does is just overwrite that one method and then rebind that over the native container. And now everybody asks for a native container, and they'll get your custom container, which means every time Laravel asks for a container, it's going to get your custom container, which means it now will get storage OMG yay instead of whatever the default storage one would have been. You have that power, right? And being able to extend and overwrite and rebind native classes is really powerful. We'll talk about some of those in 3.01. But there's a lot of things you can do once you realize that if there's one tiny thing you don't like and there's not a hook waiting for you, that's not the end of the day. You can always just overwrite it. As long as it's not private, and I don't know if anything in Laravel is private, you can still extend it, overwrite it, rebind it back in the container, and now yours is the one that's being returned instead of the native one. Oh, I actually gave some examples. So this whole thing I've been talking about, the logger all along, Bugsnag's documentation actually tells you to do that. So what they do is, first of all, they set up their own singleton. They say, I got a singleton named bugsnag.logger and another one named bugsnag.multi. We'll ignore multi right now, so just logger. So what they've done is they've come up with their own little short code called bugsnag.logger, and it returns their logger the way they want. OK, cool, that makes sense. What are you going to do with it now? Down at the bottom, they're now finding all the things that were previously pointing over to logger, and they instead say point them over to the bugsnag logger instead. And as you can see, it's those two: the Illuminate contracts, log contracts, and then the PSR interface for logging. So they said anytime anybody asks for those, instead of giving them Laravel's native logger, give them ours instead. It's a little bit different than what I said, but there's the two different ways to do it, such that every single time somebody's asking for what previously would have been one interface, one instantiation representing a logger, it's now getting a different one. And I mentioned the contracts. Taylor did a lot of work on making all the primary components for Laravel implement a certain set of contracts, these interfaces, and so that you can come along and customize them, so that you can come along and make your own or whatever. All this understanding of the container and the binding, plus understanding these contracts means at any given moment, if you want to, you can just rip out the mailer, you can rip out the queue handle, you can rip out whatever else and put your own in there. And that's built in, that's a part of it. Remember, this is not weird, edgy stuff. This is what Laravel is supposed to do. This is for me as much as it is for you. 2.1 was super long, and I didn't feel like making a 4.01, so this is just, OK, cool. Packages and publishing. When somebody develops a Laravel-specific package, they have the ability to introduce something called publishing, which means when you run PHP Artisan Vendor Publish, it sends things into your app directory. And remember, we're starting to recognize a little bit of a trend here. Your app directory is what's customizable to you. Your vendor directory is what's not. So publishing something means taking something from a package that originally was just always going to serve you the default out of the vendor directory and moving that thing into your app directory so all of a sudden you can customize it. Right? So that is all about this shift we're talking about, taking something that you're not supposed to change and making it something you're supposed to change. So as a package developer, think about that. What are the things I want to allow my users to be able to change? Great, make them publishable. So Spark views are publishable, therefore they should be edited. Media library config file is publishable, therefore it should be edited. That's the whole reason it's publishable. And prior to 5.5, you run PHP Artisan Vendor Publish, and it publishes everything, which you usually don't want. So you have to remember to pass it to service provider, and it's a bit of a pain in the butt. In 5.5, when you hit PHP Artisan Vendor Publish, it gives you an interactive thing, just like Taylor told us about yesterday, which is one of my actually most exciting features, because the number of times I published for a single package and accidentally published for 20 other packages, and then had to go undo the whole thing is innumerable. So this is a good thing. All right, you can create custom facades if you understand what they are. And it turns out it's extremely easy. It's very powerful and expressive. And it's not as complex as you think for somebody else coming along later to discover it. I'm assuming you have some sort of IDE like PHP Storm or Sublime Text with certain plugins that make it so you can command click or control click a single class and it's going to tell you when it's going to go for. So I want to teach you about facades because A, I don't want coming across somebody else's custom facade to be something that throws you. And B, I want you to know that it's really easy for you to create a custom facade and it won't make it undiscoverable for other people if they learn about facades. So the way a facade works is you create a new class, it extends the Illuminate Support Facades class, and then it has a single method called getFacadeAccessor. And what that does is it returns a string that is an address in a container. And that's it. That's all a facade is. Laravel's doing the work for you to make it so that that class now, when you call a static method on that class, it's going to pull an instance of that thing represented at that address out of the container and run that as a non-static method on that thing. OK, cool. That's great. That's useful. I think you all know the syntax of facades. But creating a facade is basically nothing. As long as you have something that is bound to the container, creating a facade for it is just this. New class extending facade, get facade accessor, go use it everywhere. So why that's helpful is, first of all, it's easy for you to do. But second of all, if you come across a custom facade and you go, well, I don't know what this is, command click it, you see the source, and then often you'll see the get facade accessor and you're like, oh, I don't know how to figure out what that thing is. Well, that thing represents something that's bound in the container. So go find where that's bound, which should be in a service provider somewhere, and then you're done. It's actually very easy to discover what these things are and what they're doing. So here's an example. If I'm doing something with Fitbit, I have a Fitbit service provider that binds this Fitbit string to whatever I want it to do. And then later, I create a Fitbit class, which extends facade. And its getFacadeAccessor returns that exact same string, Fitbit. And then am I consuming code? Now I can call all of the non-static methods on this Fitbit class or whatever I returned as static methods on the Fitbit facade. Really fast, really easy, really simple. Additionally, because all facades are a tiny little layer in front of an address in the container, it means how easy swapping things in the container is also accessible for you for swapping facades. People hated facades because, oh, it makes everything untestable. Turns out that's not actually even remotely true, because all a facade is literally a string referring to something out of the container. So if you have tests and the thing that you're testing, objects under test are relying on facades, then you can swap that out by just swapping out whatever thing it is that that facade is referring to. And some of the native facades, as you can see here, actually have built-in mocking capabilities. Cache should receive get once, blah, blah, blah. You actually have mockery built into it. So if that exists, of course, that's great. But when you make your own facades, you're not making your code less testable. You just need to teach people a little bit. This is one of those discoverability things where the people complaining just don't know how the thing works. It's not actually less discoverable. Another custom thing we can do, custom validation pre-5.5. In a service provider somewhere, you extend the validation, and you've created a new validation string called repo, and then it does whatever is there. It takes the attribute and everything like that. And then you can use it later as an actual validation rule, and you can teach it the language. In 5.5 later, it's much easier because it's a single class that represents all of this. Plus, you can do a lot more work as you're pulling dependencies out of the container and everything. So as you can see here, we are doing that same kind of work, but when you look at this original repo one, it's taking the name of the attribute and it's taking the value. It's not really doing anything else, right? This one is taking more than just the thing that the person typed. It's also taking a source. And you start asking the question, well, where are these values actually coming from? This new way of doing it, and I wish I had more time to teach you about it, actually gives you the ability to do a more nuanced and a broader validation than previously, because you have an object that in your validation syntax is being instantiated and can have things passed into it. So when you're validating, for example, a branch name for one repository, you can validate the user's input, which is the branch name, and maybe you're on the repository 5 page. You can also pass the repository 5 into this thing and do much more complex validation than we could before. So this new validation syntax is super, super powerful. We also got macros we talked about before. A macro is essentially a really easy way for you to extend a core class without actually having to do any work to extend it. You don't have to do all that stuff I talked about with extending it and rebinding it. You just go in here and you create, this basically creates a new method named, method named JSend on a response. Blade directives, super easy to create. Traditional style, you would say blade directive public, and it's replaced with this PHP string. And then blade directive end public, it's replaced with that PHP string. They're very simple, they're very easy. But with blade if in 5.5, it's even faster because just the conditional, non-conditional blade directives are still, you do them the same way, but conditional ones are a lot easier. Again, we saw this yesterday, so I won't go into much more detail. View composers make certain values available to all your views all the time. I'm going to move a little bit faster because I'm a little bit behind, so sorry about that. Custom route model bindings. If you ever use route model bindings, it sniffs the type hint for the thing that you're asking for. So if you say, this particular part of my route user should be solved, and you can see by the method signature that it's app user user, that's going to pull an instance of that user that's resolved using the ID. So if you say profile/1, that's going to say, give me user 1. Well, here we can say, yeah, that's cool, but I also only want it to be public users, and I don't want to look it up by that one parameter. I want to look it up with that parameter or whatever else. You can customize how they're bound. Form requests, they exist. They're great. Look them up. This will be in the show notes. Sorry, I'm moving forward because there's some things that matter. For example, this GIF. I had to get to here before I do anything else. All right, Custom Laravel 301, we'll move faster. So arbitrary route bindings. You can do route bindings that are not models. For example, if you want to do a traditional route model binding style thing, but the thing is not backed by a database table, instead it's just an array of possible topics, you can do that. You just say route bind topic, but instead of defining something, some lookup, you can just say look it up in this array or look it up in this external service, whatever. And what it's going to do here is it's going to pass in whatever comes after list, and it's going to pass it in that array, it's going to pull out the value, and that's it. Or it'll throw an error if you want, whatever you want to do. You can have it do a 404 if that topic doesn't exist. As you can see here, you can also pull something out of container. So it can actually say, if they go to repository / blah, 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 go look up that repository in GitHub, make sure it exists, and then pass it into our methods. So again, more customizations, stuff that would have been previously the top of your controller or in some crazy repository somewhere, you can just put it directly in Laravel basic stuff. You can do custom request objects. You can take the Illuminate request object, and you can make changes to it, and you can rebind it in. Or you don't even have to rebind it. You can just ask for an instance. Normally when you type hint request at the top of a controller method or something, instead type hint my magical request, and you'll get it, and it'll be fully fleshed out, because it's extending the request, so it's fleshed out the same way. Or you can do custom response objects. Let's say every single time this half of the app, you're doing JSON or you're doing JSON API or something like that, you have to wrap or decorate your things. And you're like, oh, I'm going to reach for some custom package. Well, you could just create a custom response type that does all that decoration for you. And then every single time you're doing a response, instead of doing all that decoration every time, you just say, give me a magical response instead of a normal response. Magical response does all the decoration for you. You're good to go. In 5.5, it's even easier. All you have to do is implement this responsible trait, or this responsible interface, and then whatever comes out of toResponse is going to be returned. So you could take an eloquent model or a random PHP class, implement this responsible thing, and whatever comes out of toResponse is what happens whenever you return it, which is really powerful. You can do custom eloquent collections. Your eloquent models can define that anytime you get a whole bunch of them back, instead of getting a normal database collection, you get a special collection that has superpowers. So if you've got items in a store, maybe you want to have a price method on it that makes the sum of the price plus the taxes available to you. Great. So now every time you're working with that collection, you can just hit price on it, and you'll get a price of all the objects you're working with at that moment. Or, most nefarious, you can actually hijack index.php. And I've actually done this before. And what happened here was we had a CodeIgniter app that we were slowly converting over to Laravel over time. So we brought in Laravel sessions, we brought in Eloquent, we brought all these other things. But at some point, we needed to convert entire routes, but not all at once. And we weren't entirely sure the best system to convert not all at the same time. So what we did was, in index.php, it runs the whole response. And I wish I had index.php open for you right now. It runs through the whole thing. And at the end, you have a response. And normally at the end of index.php, it just says, send the response. And that's it. So we're like, well, why don't we actually check the response? So we check the status code in the response. If it's not 404, we send it and you're done. But if it is 404, we just basically said, hey, the Laravel part of this app just gave up, doesn't know what to do. Let's pass it off to CodeIgniter. And then it boots up the entire CodeIgniter instance. So granted, the whole CodeIgniter half of this app is slower right now, but who cares? And then CodeIgniter takes it over. You can do these things. That's not super discoverable, but sometimes it's what you got to do. And it's not in the app directory, but it's not in vendor, so I can customize it. These things are all available to you. Remember SpiderMan, great responsibility. But they're all possible if you need to do them. Final gift break. It's very appropriate for what I was just telling. You can do it, right? All right, a few last pieces before I'm done. Independent study, there's 2 other tools I want you to be aware of in your customization of your Laravel out of the box. First of all, Homestead. If you're still using Homestead, did you know that you can create a custom Homestead configuration file for every one of your projects? Very, very easy to have this YAML file that you pass around as a part of your Git repo, and every single person who spins up this project now just spins up a little Homestead project, customized exactly the way you want with your dependencies, with your database names, whatever else. It's super easy. When you bring in Homestead, there's a Homestead make command that generates that YAML file automatically filled with all the information it already knows about your project. It's very intelligent. So you can see I was working on a project called Blide from New York, It's Me, and so it already filled all those things out for me in the Homestead config, which makes your life easier. Or if you're using Valet, you should use Lambeau, because I'm a dork and I made it. But we just added something to Lambeau. If you're not familiar with Lambeau, it's basically, it takes the Laravel new project name and wraps it around some Git commits and some other basic stuff that you basically always run at the beginning of every project. But we just added a few things that make it really easy for you to have after scripts that run after. So for example, every single time I run it, I also want to include these 5 different composer dependencies, right? I wanted something to make it so that every time I create a new Laravel project, I always have these. You might notice if you follow me on Twitter that I ask for people, what are your favorite composer dependencies, packages that you bring into every Laravel app? It's for this. So now you make an after script in Lambeau, and every time you say Lambeau migrate application, you hit enter, it creates a directory at Laravel News in it, spins up the database for you, whatever else you want, does your first Git commit, but then you can also have it pull in your favorite packages, run some other things, bring in a nitpick.json file, whatever else it's going to be, all these things all together in your project every single time. So these little customizations are all a part of this kind of customization process of learning more. Oh, yeah, you go. I actually referenced it. Commonly installed packages. It's a blog post. It'll be linked in the talk notes. Yada, yada. OK, recap. We're at the end. With great power comes great responsibility. So customize responsibility. Remember the ideology. We want to make sure that other people are able to discover what we're doing later. Customization is important. And part of the reason I pointed these customizations out to you is because of the fact that these are the ones that anybody who knows Laravel should know about. So always reach for a Laravel customization before you reach for something that you're making yourself. Second, prioritize discoverability, but don't enshrine it. Just because something is more or less discoverable does not mean it's definitive. I'm not making rules that you can now go way too far with, like Jeffrey talks about. These are all just maxims that you should consider in your development processes. Number 3, start with modifying the intended to be modified. Okay? Always start with the app directory. Whatever Laravel exposes for you to be modified, always start there. That's always the best place to start. Number 4, but when you need to, go in the container and start hacking stuff around. If it's in the container already and you make some changes to it, at least it's still within Laravel core. And then number 5, sometimes you actually need to create entirely custom instances of classes. But again, if you're working with the base stuff, if you're working within the container, somebody else can discover it because they understand how facades work, they understand how bindings work, whatever else. And then finally, custom Homestead and Lambeau. All of this will go live any second at customlaravel.com, including that really wonderful graphic that I showed you at the beginning. And so there's tips there, there's slides, and I'd love to know if you have any tips, if you have any questions or anything like that, send them over to me, and I'll keep updating that website so it can be a resource that we all use for this kind of stuff. So the primary takeaway is, when you're going to customize the stuff Laravel already hints for you to customize. And always go outward from there. And then, when you can, prioritize discoverability. That's it. Thank you very much.